Hello everyone and welcome to Plot Twists. So I thought today we would do another top 10. My plan is to do my top 10 favorite Barnes & Noble classic editions. If you're not familiar, these are special editions of books. They're all hardcover. They're all really beautiful, to be honest. And a lot of them are classic stories, but they aren't all that way, as you'll see as we go. Or maybe they are and I just don't consider them classics. Who knows? Let me know what you think. If you think they're all classics, I'd like to know. But anyway, without further ado, they're in no particular order, but I figured let's get started. Okay, the first one that I want to talk about today is the Barnes & Noble Classic Edition of Little Women. If you're not familiar, Little Women is a story by Louisa May Alcott that is about 4 sisters and their struggles growing up. The book is great in general. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. But how beautiful is this classic edition? And it fits the aesthetic of Little Women so perfectly. The pink, the little flowers. And just to show off the back a little bit, it's got the pictures of the 4 girls, which is even better. Also didn't realize until I picked this up that there are more stories in like the Little Women, series, I guess you'd say, that I haven't read before. So that's also super exciting. But yes, so Little Women. The second book I want to talk about is the H.G. Wells 7 novels collection. Man, oh man, is this cover not so perfect? If you guys aren't familiar with H.G. Wells, everything he writes is sci-fi, and I haven't read anything of his that I did not love. Let's put it that way. So just showing up the spine, still fitting with the space theme. And it looks blue in the picture, but the cover is most definitely purple. And then just to show off the back. The illustrations on this are gorgeous. The 7 novels that are included in this are The Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man, War of the Worlds, and 3 stories I haven't heard of called The First Men in the Moon, The Food of the Gods, and In the Days of the Comet. So that's pretty cool. 3 books I didn't even know existed. And the inside cover is still going on with the space theme, but oh, just the pictures, it's so pretty. If you are unfamiliar with H.G. Wells and has not read any of his books, I would highly recommend starting out with The Time Machine. It's a really quick read. I think it's only a little over 100 pages, but the concept behind it is super interesting. The world that you're transported into is iconic, and it's referenced, I feel like, in a lot of things. So, yeah, The Time Machine. Highly recommend. Okay, the next book I picked up that I am obsessed with is the written stories of the original Star Wars trilogy. And there are a couple different covers of this particular Barnes & Noble classic, but in my opinion, the best part of the Star Wars universe is all the little droids and robots and whatnot. And my favorite of which, before current times, was always R2-D2. I think I'm now more of a BB-8 fan. He's just so cute. But this is definitely my favorite cover of this. Also, as you go across the spine, you have the Stormtrooper, Darth Vader, the lightsaber, and then of course the iconic Death Star, Millennium Falcon combo. You can't tell as well in the picture, maybe a little bit, but the Death Star is a metallic-y silver color, and it just makes this even better. And then just like before, the inside cover has another scene but drawn in a more realistic way, which is pretty cool. If you're unfamiliar with the books of the original Star Wars trilogy, they were actually movies first, books second. So, but if I remember right, the books were written while the first movie was being filmed. So they don't exactly match the movies, but they're pretty close. There's little subtle differences, but for the most part they're the same. And it's just as enjoyable to read as it is to watch. It feels like you're transported into the Star Wars universe. So, reading in general, but if you enjoy Star Wars and reading, would highly recommend. Okay, the next two books I actually want to talk about in tandem. There's actually now a third out, but the Barnes & Noble Classic Editions of Agatha Christie novels. I had actually never read an Agatha Christie story until the Barnes & Noble Classic came out. This one first, Murder on the Orient Express. And I understand the hype behind Agatha Christie. I'm not even a huge fan of mystery stories in general, but the character of Hercule Poirot is definitely a character that I could read over and over and over and over again. And her writing style, the subtle things that she works into the story. I actually read Murder on the Orient Express twice. And the second time I was like, oh my God, she hints at this thing at the end here and that kind of stuff. And God, that's so enjoyable to read. So this particular copy includes Murder on the Orient Express, as well as The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and Curtain, Poirot's Last Case. And the other copy includes And Then There Were None, Crooked House, and Endless Night. And just reiterating on how obviously gorgeous these are. It's hard to tell, but this color here on the cover is actually rose gold. And comboed with the slight like pink tinge on the blue is perfect. I don't know who designed this, but they were correct. So on the front here, you can obviously see the man and the cup. And by the time you see the back, it's the cup tipped over and the hand to indicate he's no longer alive. And it's just, oh, it's so good. In addition to that, instead of having some sort of scene in the front, they have this combination of like the hats and the dagger and the mustache. And it's just such a like old, I don't want to say old, classic like print here. I just feel like it's so appropriate. I'm a fan. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. You can kind of tell that this is one of the newer Barnes & Noble classics because they have these more realistic looking pictures on the front instead of the, where this is clearly like glued on or attached. It's, I don't know if you can see, but it's very clearly like on top of it as opposed to part of it. And that's kind of a bummer with some of the new ones, but I mean, the spine is equally as great. And the back of this one has the iconic quote, which I approve of that choice. And Edgar Allan Poe's stories are just so weird and great, and his work is some of my favorites. I'm specifically a huge fan of Telltale Heart. Obviously, there's the iconic stories and poems like The Raven that are also great. Yeah, highly recommend. On a similar note, this is another, obviously, the Wrinkle in Time trilogy by Madeleine L'Engle. And you can see this is another one of those where it's pasted on top. But the pattern here with the circles and the stars, perfect. It's such a perfect like visual for A Wrinkle in Time. And you can see the spine continues that, and the back as well, plus the kids, which is great. So A Wrinkle in Time was one of my favorite stories as a kid, and I reread it right before the movie came out, and boy did I internalize things very differently as a kid than I did as an adult. This, I mean, for it being written, I think to some degree as a children's story, because it was definitely something we read in school, there's a lot of kind of intense, gritty adult themes in this book. And I mean, I feel like there's a lot of kids' movies that that's true of, but this one in particular, I mean, the challenges that they face and everything that goes on, I don't know, it makes me sad as an adult to see these kids going on this journey by themselves. And I'm like, where is the adult to save you? But overall, I mean, A Wrinkle in Time is great. The concept is great. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Okay, the next classic edition I want to talk about is the fairly new Stephen King collection. I picked this up right before Halloween, thinking that I would make it to read some of these, and obviously that didn't happen this year. But I was so excited to see some Stephen King books in a Barnes & Noble Classic Edition. For starters, because Stephen King books are unreasonably expensive, I feel like. Finding one that is 20 bucks or less is rare, no matter how big they are. I mean, and finding them used is almost impossible. So, seeing it in a Barnes & Noble Classic Edition where 3 of them is $25 for probably the first time ever. I actually probably saved money buying this as opposed to the books individually. But I have read a handful of Stephen King books. None of these. I've obviously watched The Shining. It's a very iconic movie. But I'm super excited to read it and see how different it is. I've heard good things about Carrie. And I've heard that Salem's Lot, while it's not as scary, is very, very good, but very weird. And I enjoy reading weird books, so that was pretty exciting. In terms of how this one looks, the spine here, I just thought this was perfect. The bucket that's obviously from Carrie. The use of the red and blue on top of the black is also really cool, and the blue provides that great contrast with the red that I would expect to be on a Stephen King novel, so that's pretty cool. Oh, guys, I just realized that this is an S and a K. It has nothing to do with anything, but that's pretty cool either way. It's really good. Okay, continuing along. This is actually the first Barnes & Noble Classic Edition I bought. I'm a huge fan of fairy tales, if you can't already tell from my channel and the number of fairy tale retellings that I read. But actually being able to go back and reference the original stories is super cool. I never realized how different they were, and most of them are super dark. Looking back, I guess fairy tales were not necessarily originally intended exclusively for children, which is kind of interesting how that's evolved over the years to become children's stories. But this, the cover again, it's purple with the gold flowers. And then the picture on front of little Thumbelina is just, it's perfect. The back cover of this just continues the same theme with a tree and the birds in it. And then the inside cover shows like a castle on a hill, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. I'm a fan. I also bought the Grimm Brothers fairy tales at the same time, and I realized that between the two of them, that's basically every fairy tale that's ever been written, so that's awesome. The stories are good. They're short. This is a great, like, before bedtime read, I feel like, because you can find stories that are, like, a couple pages long. You can find stories that are, like, tens of pages long. Not that none of them are super long. So it's easy to, like, read for as long as you feel like, and then put it down, and it's fine. You're not in the middle of something, which is cool. So I am so excited to read this one. They created this fairy tales from around the world, and I'm hoping that this gives you some interesting perspectives to some of the Eastern world countries. I'm hoping this has like some Chinese fairy tales, some Indian fairy tales, that kind of thing. Because I feel like we're fairly familiar with like Hans Christian Andersen and the Grimm brothers because their stories are told over and over and over and over again. But I feel like there's not a lot of fairy tales from the Eastern countries that I'm familiar with. And I love fairy tales. More fairy tales is never a problem. So I'm super excited to read this. And then the aesthetics on here, the Once Upon a Time was perfect. I love the color combos with it's almost like a red pink and then some lighter shades of pink and then the gold, and it's perfect. So So in general, this is 10 of the 30 plus Barnes & Noble Classic Editions I own, and there's definitely a couple more that I intend to pick up. There's a third Agatha Christie collection that looks really great. There is another series of Star Wars books that look fabulous. And I'm sure as they come out with more, there'll be even more that are like enthralling and beautiful and everything I want them to be. And typically, more than once a year, they do by they I mean Barnes & Noble does, a buy one get one 50% off sale, which is usually when I buy them, so I buy a lot of them at once, which is how I have so many. But overall, I think they're great. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I thoroughly enjoyed making it. Let me know if you guys enjoy the Barnes & Noble Classic Editions and what some of your favorites are. Maybe there's some I don't even know exist, which would be even cooler. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!